Okay, we're going to get started in the interest of time. When I was talking to the organising committee about what we wanted out of this talk and the separation of the two streams, it was about saying, as a leader, we're responsible for the delivery of all of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve in diversity and inclusion. The issue being, we don't actually go out and run the Come and Try Day. We don't go and run out the activity. So what is the leader's job if we're still getting assessed on the outcomes? And so when I was talking to a few people about it, there was no other names that came to mind other than Niki. And so I hit her up and I said, look, this is the idea. And from there, it's just been very much I can do that. So I'm very excited to sit on this one. This is something I'm going to enjoy very much. So without further ado, it's Dr. Niki Vincent, and we have her as the Equal Opportunity Commissioner for South Australia. That's right. Yes, but in a former life it was...
CEO of the Leaders Institute.
Okay, CEO of the Leaders Institute of South Australia. So a couple of really good job titles there for a topic like this. So I will hand over to Niki now.
Thanks very much. Thank you, John. That's great. Look, I'm going to talk, I think a lot of this stuff that I was going to talk about in the early part of this presentation has been said, so I'm going to skip through that fairly quickly, talk about the leadership stuff, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A, or it doesn't have to be Q&A just with me, it can be a discussion between all of us. So I'll get started, run through as quickly as I can. If there's anything you want to ask me along the way, feel free to do so. But as I said, we'll leave enough time for questions at the end. So I might put this up here. So why does inclusion and diversity in sport matter? No, that's not going to work. I'll do it like this. That work? You might need to help me out, John.
Click on anything blue.
We're going to take that thing on. Excellent. Okay. All right. So why does it matter? Well, because the demographic makeup of Australia is changing, and according to the Bureau of Statistics, 28% of Australians were born overseas. Almost 50% have parents born in other countries. There's over 260 languages spoken, and almost 20% of Australians have some form of disability, and over half of our population are women and girls. And that's why we need diversity in our sport. With all this diversity in the composition of the Australian community, inclusion is about ensuring that sport caters to that whole range of backgrounds, cultures, ages and ability. Anyone who wants to participate in the various activities and roles within a club. Often we interchange inclusion and diversity. Obviously we can have a really diverse mix of people in our organisations, but if they're not actually included, then we're not really there. So in simple terms, diversity is the mix, and inclusion is getting the mix to work really well together. Quoting from a recent Australian Sports Commission article, sport's widely regarded as a core component of social inclusion in Australian communities. It provides all sorts of social inclusion outcomes, and it really can promote a sense of belonging, trust, cooperation, and it can be a very, very powerful force. But equally, a great deal of sports reaffirm the existing power structures that cause discrimination and inequality in society. And sport has, in many instances, played a big role in reproducing division and exclusion along racial and other lines. And discriminatory incidents still occur too regularly on the field, in the stands, and in online environments. And that's why leadership is so important in inclusion and diversity, because when sport is led well, then it can contribute to social inclusion in a very powerful way. But when it's done badly, it can exclude just as powerfully. You know all these benefits, so I'm not going to make a big deal out of them. This is the business case for inclusion in sport. And there are also business cases for inclusion in business that apply here as well to the business of sport. And this is about the community of sport. The two operate interchangeably in many ways. So the business case is also very compelling, and as Lucinda Hewitson was just talking about, if we only recruit in our own image, it results in monocultures, and there's plenty of research around that shows that unconscious biases, so recruiting in our own image, people who look like us and can do the things that we can do, produces groupthink and is really detrimental to the organisation in terms of innovation, creativity and so on. So, inclusive leadership. This refers to the mindsets or ways of thinking. So the Diversity Council of Australia, along with companies such as Stockland, ANZ, Programmed and Optus, have recently taken a look at the research evidence in the area of diversity and inclusion, and they found that inclusive leadership is one key enabler for organisations to actually access the inclusion advantages. So what is it? It refers to a set of capabilities, in particular mindsets or ways of thinking, knowledge, skills and behaviours that leaders possess that make their organisations inclusive. So the 5 mindsets that the Diversity Council has identified are these. So the first one is identity-aware mindset, and developing this mindset means learning about your own and others' identities, so age, gender. And in order to build that kind of mindset, you have to reflect on your own identity. What categories of people do I fit into? What I fit into male or female or abled, have a disability, sexual orientation, what's my socio-economic background, what's my ethnic background and so forth. And think about what advantages and disadvantages that you experience as a result. And then think about others who are unlike you and similarly. So I think the videos that you've seen through the morning have been really great examples of putting yourself in others' shoes. So you think about and challenge assumptions that might be made about people. So physical appearances can be deceptive and superficial. For example, a second-generation Australian from a non-Anglo background may identify very differently from a recent immigrant who looks the same or looks very similar. And so you need to be conscious about our unconscious biases in those areas, and that's what developing an identity-aware mindset is about. The next mindset is a relational mindset. So this means, developing this means creating teams and networks in which a diversity of people feel that they actually belong and are valued and respected. So reflecting on your own ability to communicate across different social and workplace identities with different identities to your own, and then evaluate your own pipeline of emerging talent, emerging leaders and other talent areas, and think about how well you support people who are different from you in that pipeline, and how you reward them, how you reward their strengths and accomplishments, and how do you regularly network with people or offer assignments to people with diverse skills to your own, and mindsets and backgrounds and experiences. The next is an open and curious mindset, and this is about being curious about and open to new and different perspectives from a diversity of people. It means not being afraid to be wrong, actually embracing this because you can learn and grow from it. If you have defensiveness and protectiveness, that'll shield you from growing and learning, so you need to get over that. You need to lean into failure by developing an experimental mindset, so improvising, creating safe-to-fail experiments that go wrong, because that's what experiments do, being able to say, sorry, that went wrong, what did we learn from that? And that's how you grow your own resilience and build trust. I was talking to someone earlier about the fear involved in sometimes taking on some of these projects around diversity and inclusion. the fear of being wrong or it not working or not knowing how to do it. And we were talking about just saying yes and then working it out later. It's having the courage to just say yes, we'll do it, and then and work with the individual as the need arises to help them feel included. And if it doesn't work, being prepared to say, sorry, that's all gone wrong. What did we do wrong? How can we learn from that? If you can minimise your fear of failure, of being wrong, or at least make sure that your desire to learn and grow is much bigger than your fear of failure, then you become liberated and you can take risks and fully embrace life and leadership in an inspiring way. And if you take nothing else away from this session, that's pretty much my big line is do that. Do some serious self-reflection about your capacity for risk and experimentation and dealing with ambiguity, because that's what's involved in a lot of this work around diversity and inclusion as leaders. Developing a flexible and agile mindset. This is about being responsive to a diversity of people. It's very similar to the previous mindset in lots of ways. It involves mixing up the way that you think. Innovation and creative ideas often arise after periods of focused attention, but we all know we often get our best ideas in the shower or when we're bushwalking. We're just not thinking about those ideas. So allow time to concentrate on projects or challenges, both in a deliberate manner and in an unfocused manner as well while you're doing something else. It's about mindfulness, I think, as well. A growth mindset is the next capacity, next mindset, and this involves challenging accepted practices and incorporating very different perspectives into how business is done. It involves reflecting on how your organisation may be trapped by ways of doing things that worked in the past or that work best for some people. Explore how your formal structures, the way that your organisation works and your cultural norms create the playing field and the rules for all the activities. It's really hard to do this. You've actually got to get diverse people to come together and think about how that's happening. What are the ways that we do meetings? What are the rules of our organisation that are just given, that we don't even think about? They're just our norms. And how do they exclude or include? You need to consider your own default interpretations and behaviours, just the things that you do naturally, as if it were the case, and have those and challenge those. Ensure that team members from all backgrounds, experience, job levels, business areas and functions can contribute to that decision making. And then practicing respectfully challenging identity-based stereotyping and biased decision-making. So this leads me to the leadership shadow, which is a model that was developed by the National Male Champions for Change group, started by Elizabeth Broderick when she was Federal Sex Discrimination Commissioner, and the group Chief Executive Women. Now, I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this well. I'm happy to share the slides and I can give you a reference for where to go. I did try to pack a lot into it last night when I was working on this. It's also being implemented by the South Australian Chiefs for Gender Equity, a group that I convene. It's like the Male Champions for Change all around the country, with the exception that when I came on board as Commissioner, I made it 50-50 women, whereas all the other groups are male. And so we have a fabulous group of chief executives in the Chiefs for Gender Equity that are 50% women. So each chief in the group is actually undertaking its own leadership shadow audit, each person, and looking at how they, what they do, making this a plan of action. I'll go into that a little bit more. So the leadership shadow model starts from the premise that the path to leading performance improvement on any priority, so like becoming more diverse and inclusive, but actually anything, starts at the top. And that's the whole idea of these Chiefs for Gender Equity and Male Champions for Change and so forth. What we say as leaders, how we act, what we prioritise and what we measure all determine what actually gets done and what doesn't get done as well. These four elements make up the leadership shadow model. which allows you as a leader to consider whether the imprint of your words and actions is as clear and powerful as you want it to be. For example, in the area of what I say, questions you could ask yourself might include: how integrated are diversity and inclusion objectives within our strategy and our organisational values? How often and in which forums do I, as a leader, speak publicly and passionately about diversity and inclusion? And how much of a priority do I make that in our organisation? And how often do I talk about what we're actually doing in that area publicly? Or is that someone else's job? How well could others in my organisation and perhaps in the community more broadly describe why diversity and inclusion are important to me? And if they can't describe why they're important to you, then you haven't done a good enough job of communicating that publicly to people. Because that should be something, if you're leading diversity and inclusion initiatives, that everyone understands. Examples of questions to ask yourself about how I act could include: how do I reward and promote people with a track record of inclusive leadership? So how am I making that part of the performance indicators for my team? How comfortable am I with addressing my own biases, conscious and unconscious, just as Lucinda talked about earlier? And if Anglo males dominate my team, how do I acknowledge the imbalance and take visible steps to address it? How do I create inclusion when selecting people to lead major initiatives? Is there a bias in the way I give out that work? How clearly do I create and uphold standards of acceptable behaviour and desired behaviours? And how fair and consistent am I when the consequences and standards aren't met? Examples of questions to ask yourself about what I prioritise could include: how do I ensure that our systems and processes enable inclusion? How am I personally demonstrating that I'm working to break down the bias that may exist against inclusion? Do I focus on winning and competition at the expense of inclusiveness and diversity and community engagement? How transparent am I about my own practices to become a more inclusive leader? How much of a role model am I? How much time do I spend with people from diverse backgrounds and experiences? And how well do I understand their perspectives and priorities, including religious and cultural differences and expectations? And how well do I actually support diverse role models in my own organisation across the broad spectrum of diversity? And finally, questions that relate to what do I measure or how do I measure could include: have I set detailed diversity and inclusion targets for players, elite representatives, coaches and my organisation in general? What happens when these targets are exceeded and what happens when they're not? How am I held to account for diversity and inclusion objectives? How well have I integrated discussions about diversity and inclusion into the performance appraisals of my team members? And do I get feedback on my own performance as a leader in this area? As I said, this model can be applied to any leadership challenge, of course, and there are a lot more dot points that could have been added under those headings that are unique to your own circumstances, your own organisations. As I said, all of our chiefs are developing their own leadership shadow assessments and then their plans of actions to make sure that they're walking the talk of gender diversity. And I'd like to encourage you to do likewise. I'm happy to share the slides, but you can access the full model and program online from Chief Executive Women, CEW, or the National Male Champions for Change website. And they also have training models in the program as well. It's early days, but I believe that we are now at the start of what I think will be a huge shift in society. This shift is from systems and organisations designed by men, for men, to systems and organisations designed by diverse people, for diverse people. I love the ad where the world was designed for people with a disability. I've spoken about this a lot lately because I've been doing an independent review of SAPOL, sex discrimination, sexual harassment and predatory behaviour in SAPOL. And SAPOL is very much an organisation that was designed by men for men, and that shift is going to be very difficult. It's been around for a very long time. They're working incredibly hard. While inequalities exist in Australia, we're forgoing the important contributions that so many people from diverse backgrounds and experiences make to us, to our economy, to our community. And by balancing the scales of equality, all people can have an equal chance to contribute both at home, in the community and in their workplaces. And that enhances the well-being of them as individuals, but also as a society. And what a different world that'll be. I would encourage you to build your own personal brand as a leader at the forefront of this progressive movement, setting the tone for your organisation's culture by demonstrating a commitment to inclusion. Don't be a laggard whose fears of loss of the comfortable status quo will make you obsolete in a few years. The most meaningful way to do this is by dedicating time to work personally on diversity and inclusion initiatives as a leader. They're not just to be given to someone lower down in the organisation to do. By pointing the way, you as leaders in your organisations attract and develop the best, most diverse talent, giving them the edge that they need to succeed. And I'd like to end with this thought-provoking quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Sorry, skip to start. An individual has not started living until they can rise above the narrow confines of their individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of all humanity. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Just go for the mic.
Anyone want to kick off with any questions?
Hi. Niki, thanks for that. Did you mention the male champions of change are males in the other states, but not in South Australia? You've got 50% females. Why did you do that?
Because I couldn't stand it any longer. When Liz Broderick set up the Male Champions for Change, she did it at a particular time, and the reason that she wanted males was because males were the majority in power in organisations. And she wanted them to stand up alongside women to champion the change. And I agree with that. I think by the time I came into the role, the Champions of Change had been going for 6 years or so. There were a lot that the whole thing has moved on. And the male champions themselves, the chiefs themselves, were actually feeling quite uncomfortable about still just being a males group. I certainly was feeling uncomfortable about that, knowing so many fabulous women in South Australia who are leaders of organisations who I felt should be on that group. And also our chiefs were not sitting alongside the chief executive women as they do at the national level, where you have that complementarity of the two groups working together. So for me, it was about exploring what are the options here. And in conversation with our chiefs, they very much wanted it to go 50% female. We set ourselves a target for 2018, and we've already reached that. We'd actually reached it within 2 months. It wasn't very hard to recruit some fabulous women. The really exciting thing about that was that as we went around and interviewed the women that we targeted, it was so exciting for the executive officer and I in hearing their stories of how they had gotten to be where they are and the struggles that they'd had. And we didn't have any of those stories from the men. And the first thing we did when the women came on board was have them tell their stories. And the men were so inspired, and they saw what they hadn't been able to see. Because if you've never experienced that, it's really hard to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And that was what was absent from the chiefs, I think, was that perspective at the table all the time of, hang on a minute, it's not as easy as you think. And let's not just play lip service to it. Let's really understand it. Let's have this as part of our reality at every meeting. And it's really ramped the chiefs up. They're much more raring to go. you're a bit tired, I think, by the end of it. So I think it's been a good move. Liz Broderick doesn't think so. She wanted it to stay the same. But Carolyn Houston, who's actually played a really key role in our Chiefs, was very happy to support me in doing it.
Anyone else? I've got some, so in the meantime, Karen, next.
Just quickly, how much of this for a leader is a learnt behaviour and how much of it is just ingrained in them long before they get there?
Oh, I don't know, 50%. I have no idea. John, it's really interesting. My PhD is actually in psychology and leadership. So I have studied quite a bit about this, and I think it depends on individuals and all sorts of other things. But what I would say is that it can be learned, and I think that's the important thing. So and that's why things like this leadership shadow and thinking about the stuff that the Diversity Council puts out and so forth in relation to leadership in this area is so important, because we go on our merry ways doing what we've always done. That's kind of, how we get through life until we get like a checklist or we think about this stuff and we realise what we're not doing. And it's exactly the same for women. Women have just as many unconscious biases about other women as men do. They've tested the Harvard implicit bias, implicit association test. They've tested men and women, and it's absolutely the same. The gender bias is the same. So women have a bias against other women. So we just go on our merry ways, and as we are asked to think about this, and if we really want to create change, if we were all thinking about this, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It actually requires us to think about it, to check our own behaviour, to really reflect on ourselves if we're going to shift. So I think that's probably the important thing. I'm sure for some people it'd be more difficult to shift than others, and that depends on a whole bunch of different circumstances. But I do believe that everyone can learn this stuff.
Niki, obviously there's some people who have access to the leadership shadow, but not all leaders do. And I'd have to say from my experience that self-analysis is a really key part to being able to change the way you think and the way you do things. But for people in this room who don't have that opportunity, what's the one practical thing that you could suggest to them that might tip them into that change?
Well, everyone can have access to the leadership shadow. You just go on to the diversity, Chief Executive Women and download the model and put your thinking cap on one night over a glass of wine. I think about this stuff. I don't actually think it's hard. These tools are freely available. The other website that's really fantastic, it's around gender equality, but it can be applied equally to any other area of diversity, is WGEA, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. They're a federal government initiative. They collect data from companies with more than 200 or more employees, so it's masses and masses and masses of data. And they've been doing that for about 5 years now, I think. So they've actually got trend data that shows when initiatives are put in place in organisations, what actually happens to their diversity afterwards. So it's brilliant. It's a world first, and it's world leading data. And they've developed a whole bunch of tools. You don't have to be a member. You can just go onto their website, look at their tools, download them and apply them. So I don't think there's any excuses for not having access to this stuff. It's all freely available, and that's what I'd recommend you do. Spend an evening, spend an afternoon having a look at the tools that are available. Workplace Gender Equality Agency, Chief Executive Women, Male Champions for Change. These are all free tools.
And we're all leaders in this room, so I was hoping there's a lot more questions to come.
Hi, I just have one question. You mentioned in one of the slides up there about the benefits of having strong leaders and promoting inclusive workplaces is that you have positive stories to share.
Yes.
I just wonder if you have some good examples of leaders that have done that have shared positive stories to bring about broader change. I suppose that feeds a bit into the discussions earlier about using media and the broader messaging.
Well, I'll ask you as a group that question. So what are the inspiring stories that you've heard that have, triggered for you something really powerful other than the ads?
Jackie McGill, I think is also on the
Yes.
Chiefs now. I heard her speak and she spoke about her personal experience of working in the mining industry. It's very male dominated, and thanks, John. And back in the day, you know, they used to walk into, like she'd go into the kind of common areas and there would be like pictures from like Zoo magazines
Yes.
plastered all over, and she became almost blind to it because that's how it had always been done. And then some other women joined and they were quite offended by it, and she kind of realised, oh, far out, what role can I play in changing this culture? And of course, the culture's come a really long way from there. So I found her very inspiring about the role of leadership that she's played in creating a more inclusive organisation.
Great. She's just been made a doctor of the University of Adelaide, actually, which is fantastic. Yeah, she's a really great one. Any other inspiring leaders?
Francis Wong from the Football Federation South Australia. Niki, I think we're doing quite well in terms of the gender sort of diversities. And as you're aware, Australia is a country of migrants. In football, for example, there's a lot of immigrations of migrants coming in. Do you think the templates that you have got for gender diversity can be used for cultural diversities? Because I think as we move to the next level in sport, it's very important for leaders to embrace the various sort of nationalities and cultures that's coming into that.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, and I didn't put gender up on any of these slides deliberately because I believe absolutely that these models can be applied to any form of diversity. In fact, any leadership challenge really. So yes, absolutely agree, and it is something that we need to work very hard on. There are a lot of barriers to inclusion for people from diverse cultural backgrounds that we need to think about, and actually applying the leadership shadow model and the DCA mindsets to that would be perfectly appropriate, I think.
Could you elaborate on your project with SAPO? Because I imagine like sport, it's a very patriarchal sort of universe.
Yeah, I can. We were asked by SAPOL to undertake an independent review of sex discrimination, sexual harassment and predatory behaviour in their organisation. A similar review had been done by the Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission. And so SAPOL came to us and asked us to do it. I don't think they were expecting quite what we would find. In fact, I know they weren't. So we surveyed 2,000 of the organisation, which is only 6,000 people in the organisation. So we got 1/3 response to our survey. And we also did interviews with key personnel and anybody else who wanted to be particularly interviewed about their experience. So we did around about 54 one-on-one interviews as well. What we found was that sex discrimination was, I think it was at 45% of respondents. Don't quote me on these statistics. Go have a look at my press release and the report because I'm doing it off the top of my head. I think it was around 45% of people had experienced sex discrimination. The rates of sexual harassment were similar to the population. So the Australian Human Rights Commission puts out sexual harassment stats each year. So about 21% of women in SAPOL had experienced sexual harassment in the last 5 years and 8% of men. What was phenomenal was that there was a 20% higher rate than the population norm of predatory behaviour. So that's behaviour from a more senior person perpetrating sexual harassment on a more junior person. And so that's something that's pretty awful and that needs to be fixed in SAPOL. We made 38 recommendations to SAPOL. Commissioner Stevens accepted every single one of them. They've set up a whole team of people looking at the recommendations and setting up the implementation of those recommendations in SAPOL. I've got my own team funded by SAPOL, but independent, so they've just given us the money and we've set up an independent team that's monitoring their progress and auditing them on an annual basis. Then we'll make those audits public, so they are publicly accountable for their implementation of our recommendations. But we're not doing it in an adversarial way. We want to work together with them. They've taken a very courageous step in having us come and reveal all of their dirty linen publicly. They've acknowledged that it's wrong and SAPOL needs to change, and it's a big cultural shift that needs to happen. It's got to be led from the top, and so we're working with the top leaders in SAPOL to do that, but we're also working with them right through the organisation. The other thing that they've funded is an independent restorative engagement process, which we're just starting now. You may be seeing some media. I've been away, so I think there might have been some media, or there will be next week about this. So people who've experienced harassment or discrimination can actually come and tell their stories, so their experiences, to SAPOL's leaders one-on-one. So we're training SAPOL's leaders, including the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioners and all the Assistant Commissioners and other levels down, in how to hear those stories and how to listen. Listening's really hard. They're problem solvers, so tend to want to, help people. And so listening and feeling, and then being able to respond in an appropriate way, hopefully with a heartfelt apology at the end of hearing these stories. And for us, that's really important, because that'll help bring about the culture shift that needs to happen. Liz Broderick always talked about, you can give as many stats as you like, but actually the shift happens in the heart. And until that shift happens in the heart, the culture's not going to shift. And that's why leadership's so important, because people, if you don't have the heart for it and demonstrate that as a role model, it's not gonna take hold. So it's an exciting project to be involved in, and I do give SAPOL all credit for being brave enough to do it. Not many organisations would be prepared to do that.
Just while I pass the mic to the next lot of questions, just going back a question a bit earlier, is there a site that you guys have of good news stories in diversity, inclusion, leadership?
It's a really good idea. No, we don't. And it's something I'm thinking we should probably do. In my own organisation, I've got a couple of people who have quite significant disabilities. So I have someone who has a lifelong progressive disease who's in a wheelchair, who's a senior manager, and another person who is completely blind and has only become blind in the last couple of years, who's now taking on a senior management role. And it's been really interesting for me, because it's watching them flourish as I've helped them to grow as leaders has been fantastic. I think they were feeling a little bit demoralised. Prior to me coming on board, there hadn't been a commissioner. There'd been an acting commissioner who was only half-time, and there was a lot of talk about whether the commission was actually even going to be funded to keep going and whether they would get a new commissioner. So I had to do a lot of work to do when I came on board, and with particularly with the manager in the wheelchair, I was feeling like she might be the first to go, sort of thing. And I believe truly that she could be a commissioner of equal opportunity one day. And she and I were having that conversation, and she said, I don't think I could do it. I just couldn't do the hours that you do. And, there's all those commitments outside of work. And I said, well, that's only if we think of the commissioner role as a full-time role. Why couldn't it be a job share? Why couldn't we make it, 2 people or 3 people or whatever? And she went, yeah, that's what we do, isn't it? So
it's a radical idea.
It would mean a change of legislation, but actually it wouldn't be that hard to do. And how fantastic to have a diversity of people leading the Equal Opportunity Commission. I think that would be a really strong statement. So that's one of the things I want to try and set up before I leave the role.
Excellent. I have one last question, but if there's anyone else who would like to ask one, I don't know.
We know each other so well. Just thinking in terms of the interplay, we've talked a lot in this session about more behavioural things as an enabler of change. We haven't really talked at all about facilities. And I'm the CEO of a state sporting organisation. That if you're in a wheelchair watching a sporting event there, it's probably a 200 metre, 200 metres to go to a non-compliant disability access toilet. And we've got a wonderful facility here, but so many of our other state sporting facilities and club facilities are just hopelessly inadequate when it comes to being particularly disability friendly around our facilities. What's your role in terms of facilities and in helping to enable us as organisations working within sport to be able to be more disability friendly and more inclusive in our actions rather than just behavioural things in terms of the plant facilities?
Well, I can tell you that that it's necessary to be legal. Let's put it that way. So if someone puts in a complaint to me, we will look at that complaint if they feel they've been discriminated against because of access at a facility. So there's a legal requirement in that regard to make things accessible. Having said that, our own building, I'm cited within the Attorney General's department, our own building doesn't do beautifully well in that regard, and we're about to move to the GPO tower in a year and a half, and so I've got my team right in there now before the building's up, talking about how we can make it so accessible so that people of diverse disability, etc., don't have to think about it. At the moment, the lift buttons are too high for people in a wheelchair. The knob to turn on the accessible toilet is too stiff. The doors are too hard to push to get in and out of our secure office and so forth. So, it has to happen. We have to invest money in this. I mean, we can't pay lip service to it and then not make things completely accessible. I mean, if it were me or you or one of our kids, that's how we would want that. I've had a kid in a wheelchair for a while, and it was such a big wake-up call to me about how difficult it is to get around. Just even a shopping centre where shops have stuff out on the street and out on the pavement and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say other than lobby, get for money to make it happen, but it's not. It goes hand in hand with inclusiveness. You can have all the diversity you want, but if you're not actually including people by making it possible for them to participate fully, then you're only halfway there.
Excellent. I will just ask one last one that I had, Bernie, because I have the mic. As leaders, we've been taught that we can delegate to experts. So I delegate my financial stuff to my accountant. We delegate marketing plans to the marketing manager. Do we delegate inclusion practice and behavioural stuff to our inclusion officers?
Oh, you can delegate. I don't think there's anything wrong with delegating. I mean, there's just no way that I could do everything that the Commission does myself, but it doesn't mean that you don't stand for it. I mean, delegating is one thing, keeping an active interest, making it a priority for you to have those conversations with whoever you delegated it to every week or every couple of weeks to see what's going on. Speaking about it publicly, as I said, making diversity and inclusion part of performance indicators, that speaks volumes to people about how much you value it, even if you are not actually running the project yourself, which I wouldn't suggest unless you're in a tiny not-for-profit organisation, in which case you probably do have to do it all yourself. But generally speaking, there's nothing wrong with delegation. It's not delegation and it disappears and I don't have to think about it anymore. It's delegation, but I'm still connected with you and I want to know what's going on and how can I help and how can I make it better and how can I guide you in your capacity? How can I grow you in your capacity to be a better leader in the area in which I've delegated to you? But there's still that responsibility to speak about what you're doing and champion it.
Excellent. That is where we will close it. I'm just going to put this down. Round of applause for Niki.